Good morning, Year 12. Today I'm going to be talking about the philosophy of the Supreme Court judges and why they are significant. Before I do that though, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about what my plan is over the next couple of weeks, as it's becoming more and more likely that we're not going to be back for a while. I'm hoping to do a schedule of videos, so to speak, and I'm going to make sure that they are something that you can work around and know when one is coming. So basically, what I'm looking to do this week is do 3 videos on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and that might be a continuing schedule for these kind of videos, just to keep everything ticking along, because we obviously, by the end of year 13, we are working towards an exam, so it is important to be thinking about getting through this stuff and not spending too long on each one. So I'm looking to do that, because that almost mirrors what we would do in lessons anyway, and it gives you a chance to look over this stuff at home in your own time and make sure that you are clear on a lot of the things. So that's the plan. As I said, today we're going to be talking about the philosophy of the Supreme Court judges and why that's significant. So the first philosophy that you need to know is the strict constructionist philosophy. Now, a strict constructionist are what we would typically say is a Republican judge, a Republican-based judge, a conservative, if you like. And a strict constructionist have a strict literal interpretation of the Constitution. They don't seek to update it. They don't seek to make the Constitution more modern. Their interpretation of the Constitution is literal. It's as it says. They focus on the language of the text more than what the language might have meant. So they're more looking at what the language is, not what the founding fathers might have meant by their language, and that means that when they read the Constitution and apply it to a case, it is really, really strict, literal language. They want to retain power of state governments. Federalism is the most important thing for strict constructionists. They don't want the main central government to become too powerful, and so they try and give the state governments much more power through their judgments. There is a focus on the original intent of the founding fathers. They're not looking to update the Constitution for what's going on in current events. They're not looking to make the Constitution a modern document. They are focusing on what the founding fathers would have wanted. And they're conservative in their political outlook, as I mentioned, more inclined towards judicial restraint and judicial deference. So they're not trying to reinterpret anything. They're not trying to change what a case means, and they're not trying to move it on to a different place. They're just going to say this is what it literally means and that's it. Usually they're appointed by Republican presidents, and Chief Justice Roberts and Associate Justices Scalia, Thomas, Alito and Gorsuch are examples. Scalia was replaced by Gorsuch, but Clarence Thomas is still a Supreme Court judge, and I'm pretty sure Alito was replaced by Kavanaugh. So there's still 4 in the Supreme Court, as well as Justice Roberts nowadays, which we're going to talk about in a second about why that causes issues, but we'll leave that for now. So that's a strict constructionist. One of the biggest examples of a strict constructionist is Antonin Scalia, or was, I suppose, because Scalia's left us now, but he was a big strict constructionist. And he used to say that the Constitution is not living, but dead. Our first responsibility is not to make sense of the law, it is to follow the text of the law. So again, as you can see, they're taking what the text says literally. They're focusing on the language rather than anything else. And a constitution is not meant to facilitate change, it is meant to impede change and to make change difficult. Now, in this class, I would have asked you what the problem with this approach is. I'm sure you can probably come up with an answer for that. As well as this slide, while you're at home, because this is the lesson 1 to 10 PowerPoint that you should have, so you should be able to access this. If you can't remember, it's in here, lesson 1 to 10 there. At the bottom of where has it gone? It's at the bottom of this slide. Role of Scalia in the Supreme Court is a YouTube video. I would go and watch that. I know it's a Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan divides opinion constantly, but Piers Morgan actually interviewed Antonin Scalia and talked about his reasoning for what he thinks and why he thinks it. And it's well worth a watch because it gives you a really good idea of what Scalia's thinking when he's making decisions. So I would really stress, go and watch that. It's 14 minutes, but it's genuinely worth a watch. And Piers Morgan is actually quite good in it, believe it or not. So that's there. It's at the bottom of this slide. Definitely go and watch it. So another quote from Scalia, which I'd like you to think about. And when you're thinking about it, I would like you to just kind of work out what he's trying to say with this. You think there ought to be a right to abortion. No problem. The Constitution says nothing about it. Create it in the way that most rights are created in a democratic society. Pass a law. A constitution is not meant to facilitate change. It is meant to impede change, to make change difficult. So he really stresses the rule of law and what the rule of law can do to change society and change things that people want changing. But he said that it shouldn't be up to the Supreme Court to get this stuff changed. It should be up to other things, such as making laws. Quite interesting. The other side of the coin is the loose constructionists. So strict constructionists, conservative. What are loose constructionists going to be? Yeah, you've worked it out. They are the democratic side. They read elements into the Constitution that they think the framers would have approved of. Okay, so they take into account what they think the framers meant by some things, and they say this is what they meant by it, this is what we should think about it now. So they are much more in favour of the Constitution being a living document that can be changed and can be interpreted in different ways. They focus on the extent of the Constitution, not just the text, which is quite important. So they're trying to work out what the point of the Constitution was and why they put this clause in and how that relates to current society, not reading it literally. They're more inclined towards judicial activism. So judicial activism is where the Supreme Court facilitates change and pushes for necessary changes in society, and they are inclined towards that. They are the people that push for that kind of thing in the Supreme Court. They're appointed by Democrat presidents, usually. And Ginsburg, Breyer, Stuttermayer and Kagan are examples of Democrat justices. Now, what you've noticed there's 4 Democrat justices and there's 4 Republican justices. And you should know of who they are, and you should have biographies for all of them, so you should know where they sit on the scale based on where they sit in the Supreme Court. You'll have noticed that there's actually not 8 judges, there's 9. And the 9th judge, I'll come back to this in a second. The 9th judge is Kennedy. Kennedy is the swing justice. He's also the Chief Justice, but he's a swing justice. And they call him a conservative who has occasionally voted with the Liberals. He's very much the median justice now, Stephen Calabresi said. In 2006 to 2007, there was 24 cases of a 5-4 majority, and Kennedy was the majority swing in all of them. And he was in the majority in 66 out of 68 opinions of the Supreme Court, so 97%. So that's why, even though there's 4 and 4, and then there's 1 extra, Kennedy being technically a constructionist because he was put in there by a Republican and that's his kind of politics, he is a swing justice that gets things done, so to speak. Now, I just said I'd go back, didn't I? I just wanted to make an example of Breyer, who's a loose constructionist. He offers the most forceful defence of what's often termed as a living constitutionalism. to appear in the Supreme Court opinion in a generation. He rejects Scalia's 18th century approach of originalism, in which all matters are taken as what the framers thought. He stakes a bold claim for interpreting the Constitution in light of its text, purposes, and our whole experience. Okay, so you can see the difference. They are looking to interpret the Constitution as a modern document that's living and can change. And there's a problem with that approach too. How do we know what the framers wanted? How do we know what they meant by specific clauses? We don't. And so that's one of the main issues with this side. And that's why there's a big argument in the Supreme Court about which side is supposed to be more original or more strong. It's very interesting. And that's why we have a swing constructionist who votes on both sides, because he votes on based on the case, not based on his original political standpoint. So, what's the problem with having Supreme Court justices or judges with two different philosophies? I'd like you to think about the answer to that, and I'd also like you to apply it to the rest of the course as well. Okay, because especially in the American course, there's a lot of things where it's one or the other, bipartisanship, and this fits with that. Okay, and what's the problem with that? What's the problem with having this bipartisanship? What's the issue that it presents? That's what I'd like you to think about. Also, as well, there obviously the Supreme Court has been around for a long time, and there are previous Chief Justices that ruled on cases, and the Supreme Court worked in different ways in the past. So I would like you to go away yourselves, and I'd like you to look at the landmark cases of these Supreme Court judges, but using the PowerPoint that I did with you the other day, but also with your own knowledge as well. And I would like you to think about how their decisions could have changed in other Supreme Courts, because it's not always been a 4-4 and then a one swing justice. There has been times when it's been completely constructionist. There's also been times where it's not, and it's been loose constructionist. And so I would like you to go back through and look at the landmark cases and see if there may have been different opinions on these cases if the Supreme Court justices were different people at different times. So that would be something that you could do, and also would be a very good case study for you to use in your exam, because if you can say, look, this is why the Supreme Court is not independent and not completely impartial, because it has to fit with its own political rules, then that's something that you can use in your exam as a case study for that. So, just to remind you, these were already on here, and I'm not taking them off now, because if I took them off it would confuse you, because I'd skip a few slides. But Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, very, very big case, very, very influential case, and something that you definitely 100% need to know. It gets rid of the separate but equal, and it removes segregation and makes segregation completely illegal. You have to know about that, and you have to know that it was a Supreme Court 9-0 decision. Okay? Would that be the same now? Would it be the same 10 years ago? That's for you to read up on and see if you can make a decision on that kind of thing. And Miranda versus Arizona, the Miranda rights, again, one that you need to know. Would it be the different based on the Supreme Court differences that we've had over the years? Because that was 5-4, which is important. That was a 5-4 case. And what was the makeup of the Supreme Court at this time in 1966? Was it going to be easier to put through this kind of legislation and make this decision based on the rule of law, or was it easier because of the types of judges that were in charge at that time? That's for you to find out. Now, along with strict constructionism and loose constructionism, you also have two different philosophies that fit with those two different things. You have judicial activism, which uses the Supreme Court decisions to promote social reform, and there's judicial restraint, which accepts precedent, stare decreases, stand by that which is decided. Now, hopefully you can work out which one fits with which side, but if you can't, let's make it clear. Judicial restraint fits with strict constructionism, and judicial activism sticks with loose constructionism. So, the bottom one, judicial restraint, is strict constructionism. Judicial activism is loose constructionism. Oh, well, there you go. I told you the answer. So, judicial activism, the Supreme Court sees itself as on par with the legislative and the executive. Okay, it's the same. It fits. It has the same power as the legislature and the executive. I.e., I'm in charge and I will seek to be a player equal to the other branches in shaping policy. And the practice by the judges of disallowing policy choices by other governmental officers or institutions that the Constitution does not clearly prohibit. Okay, again, which philosophy does this match and why? It's loose constructionism because what they're doing is they're reinterpreting laws and reinterpreting the Constitution and making it making the Supreme Court shape policies. Okay, and examples of that is the Brown versus Board of Education. There's abortion examples that you can use, all sorts. Judicial restraint accepts precedent. It's less willing to make change. It sees itself as more deferential to the legislature and the executive, as it recognises that these things are elected, and so they are accountable to the people. They stand by that which is decided, which is stare decisis, which is decisis, as in decided. Can't speak. Stare decisis. Stand by that which is decided, and again that fits strict constructionism. So, let's go back. Should the court have one side or the other, they are more likely to rule based, not rule, but make judgments based on their philosophy, as in the justices' philosophy, so whether they are strict or loose constructionists, and the Supreme Court then shows either judicial activism or judicial restraint based on the overall majority of justices, because that's a judicial restraint and judicial activism is a Supreme Court philosophy, not a justice philosophy. Yeah, let me just get my brain in order. So, when we're talking about judicial restraint, there's a debate over whether it's judicial restraint or if it's judicial deference. Are they just, or deference, because I can't speak. It's early in the morning, year 12, I'm struggling. So judicial restraint is where the Supreme Court is reluctant to make change of either laws, but usually based on traditions and what's happened before. They're less likely to want to change that. Judicial deference is where the Supreme Court defers to the legislature and executive if it's not about the Constitution. So its reluctance to implement change comes less from its own unwillingness to use its power, but rather that it recognises that the laws and actions of the legislature and the executive are by bodies that are directly accountable to the electorate. Okay, because the Supreme Court is not elected, because it doesn't show any representation to the people of America, what they do is they defer a lot of their decisions to the legislature and the executive because they recognise that they are elected. Judicial activism and restraint tend to be used as judgmental phrases by the people that disagree with the court's decision. So you wouldn't get a court that comes out and says we're using judicial activism or judicial restraint. It's usually used by someone that doesn't agree with what the Supreme Court did, and they use it as a slur against the Supreme Court. But you do need to know what they are, because you could be asked in your exam the Supreme Court uses judicial activism more than judicial restraint. How far do you agree, or something like that? And so you need to know what they are, and you need to understand the philosophies and understand what they might mean, and also understand some of the cases that refer to them. So what are the pros and cons of both of those? I think you need to know that, and you should be writing that down. And you should have, I would, if I were you, make a table or make a couple of mind maps or something that will help you remember, showing what judicial activism and judicial restraint are, and the pros and cons. What's good about them, what's bad about them. So I'm going to leave it there for today. And next time I do a video, we're going to talk about the process of nomination and confirmation and what that might mean for the Supreme Court too. Again, I hope you found this useful. I uploaded last week a sheet of homework that's got 3 sections to it. What I would like you to do over the next 3 weeks, so for this week I'm looking for a 9 marker. Next week I'm looking for a 25 mark extract, and the week after I'm looking for a 25 mark essay. And I would like you to complete those over the next 3 weeks, because that shows that we're still ticking along with our exam technique as well as learning new things. Once we get towards the end of the Supreme Court, I'll start looking at debates, and I'll start looking at doing recap activities and exam questions on the Supreme Court. But for now, for the next 3 weeks, if you could answer those 3 questions and email me your answers so I can mark them and put them in my mark book, that would be fandabidozy. Okay, thank you for watching this video, Year 12. I hope you found it useful, and until the next video, take care. See you later.